absolutely free. Just search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of the day here on the show, we are getting into our implications, namely fantasy implications for the biggest games of the weekend in both the NFL and college football. And we start off in the NFL, and I picked 4 games, a lot of divisional games as well, but a couple that I'm looking for certain aspects of teams' games to thrive or falter. And this is kind of one of those segments where I'm not just talking about the positives of how this game could look from a fantasy perspective. I want to get into the negative aspects now as well, because a lot of these divisional matchups are going to be grueling affairs going forward, especially if the divisions are hotly contested as some of these are. But at the end of the day, I feel like these are just an offering to you to get you starting to think about certain matchups, maybe some apprehensions you have going into the game, some last-minute decisions that you might want help with. These are the games that I feel like a lot of people will have fantasy hopes in, and thus I just want to present them from a lot of different perspectives. Without further ado, let's jump right into my Week 9 NFL games with the biggest fantasy implications, starting off with a big rematch in the AFC East. Maybe not as big as the last one, but certainly a big one in terms of, the history, the rivalry, but most importantly, the return of a certain player. Nope, that's the wrong graphic. Dolphins, Bills. Now, I say that Tua's health was paramount. This was obviously made before, we knew about the true status of Tua's comeback. But it's still something to monitor because remember, this was the game in which Tua was concussed. Now, it was also the game where Tua potentially had his worst performance in a Dolphins uniform in his career. And it was also one where we saw how special the Bills' defense could be, but also how once depth is called into question for the Bills, especially concerning all the injuries that's happened with them, especially at the linebacker position, how they potentially could be beaten if you have a relaxed quarterback. And so far, the Dolphins this season have not had relaxed quarterback play. And they're hoping that the return of Tua can give them their best opportunity to continue to try and find their way back into the AFC playoff picture, because we know that the Bills are not necessarily going to blow this lead in the AFC East. If they win this game, will have the head-to-head tiebreaker 2-0, and thus there'll be really no path where the Dolphins can get in winning the division, so they'll have to try and sneak into the wild card should they lose this game. This game is all about keeping Tua upright, Tua diagnosing certain things in the Bills' defense that he didn't before, and most importantly, trying to get his weapons, who a lot of fantasy football managers relied upon starting the season, going again. Because a lot of people in fantasy do not like stagnation from certain players, especially those you believe could be your big guns week in, week out, like your Hills, like your Achans, like your Waddles. So this is all about Tua, though. If Tua can't get going, then this offense can't get going either. Because without Tua willing to put in the work, without a Tua who's healthy enough, who's becoming smarter in certain areas of his game, then this Dolphins team really does have no hope right now. And they may be looking at a situation where with a high draft pick, they could be drafting to a successor. That's how dire this game could look should the Dolphins not win. On the Bills side of things, we already know how skilled this team is in terms of their talent. So I'm not necessarily concerned about the Bills from a fantasy perspective because we know what Josh Allen can do. We know what their weapons can do. Especially, a guy like James Cook, who's been a shocking revelation at the running back position for a lot of players on fantasy, myself included. So I'm not concerned with the Bills. The Dolphins is highly contingent on Tua's success. So that's why I feel like this game is so important from a fantasy perspective. The next one, though, a little bit on a lesser scale, still a divisional matchup that has a lot of weight here. The Rams and the Seahawks. This game in the NFC West is always a feisty one. I know as a Seattle fan, this is one that a lot of Seahawks fans feel like is either a must-win or you have to look good at the very least in this game in a loss to really prove that we can have staying power with this team. Because ever since Sean McVay entered the doors in LA, we've really gotten our asses handed to us in a lot of these games. And this one certainly feels like it's going to come down to a sneakily developing Rams defense versus a Geno Smith-led Seattle offense that is really trying to make the most out of a bad situation. Because right now, you're looking at DK Metcalf being out again with that MCL. You're looking at Abraham Lucas and George Fant still not coming back from injuries. And you're looking at Geno Smith having to throw the football more than he would like because of the fact that Kenneth Walker has not been effective behind that very weak offensive line. So, while it's dire straits for Seattle, there's a lot of positives for the Rams, but it still feels like a very even game. On the Rams' offensive side of things, you have a lot of potential there from a fantasy perspective because Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, yes, there have been rumors about them. Oh, Kupp could be traded. The Puka injury could be a bit more serious than we think. But if they play, chances are they're going to have a huge impact on this game. And going up against the Seattle defense that's really struggled to find any sense of identity, that could prove to be something that both of these savvy receivers could take advantage of. So I'm not concerned about the Rams offensively. But the defense is a unit that I'm really intrigued to see in this game. Yes, it's not necessarily the best offensive line they'll face all year, but it's a chance to continue developing this momentum and continue finding their footing because this is a young unit that really, at the start of the season, had a bit of its struggles, especially in the pass defense as well, where you see a little more veteran leadership, but still a very young unit there as well. If these young guys continue to develop, continue to generate good pressure, and most importantly can force turnovers for you, then I'm feeling really excited about what the Rams unit has on that side of the football. But I still feel like the Seattle offense is one that can score on anybody despite this offensive line ineptitudes. I feel like Geno has been very efficient. He's been getting the ball out quickly enough. And even though he's throwing at a high volume, he still has the most passing yards in the league. His completion percentage, I believe, is top 10. And Seattle really has only had issues in games where they're overwhelmed by superior opposition. They've been winning the games they should win, and that's why they're still contenders in this game and going forward. They just can find different ways to crank out wins against opponents that are inferior to them. And I don't know if the Rams are, but this certainly feels like a game that can be won by Seattle. They just have to, find a way to get different weapons going should DK Metcalf not play in this game, which I don't think he will. And, they can find themselves making this a close one and really taking it to the Rams at home. That's why I feel like this game is so not necessarily pivotal from a fantasy perspective, more so from a real life one, but from a fantasy perspective, could prove a lot for certain players and certain units for both of these teams. So that's why I feel like this game had to be included. Jags-Eagles, the only non-divisional game, in fact, the only interconference game that I picked for my implications this week. And this one, I like to feel will be coming down to the big play. Both of these teams are capable, and both of these quarterbacks are capable of extending the field through the air. Trevor Lawrence has really found his deep ball efficiency again, with the resurgence of Brian Thomas Jr. And then I feel like on the other side of things, the threats that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith pose as vertical threats. And what we talked about when I talked about this game, when I was talking about Jalen Hurts and his abilities to A, extend plays, and B, get the ball down the field as much as possible. But I feel that this also comes down to both of these defensive units as well, because in games such as this, the Jags defense has played well enough to get them the win, and the Jags offense has proven to be very complementary. And so, going forward, I kind of feel like this is one of those games where you have to take into account that the Jags still can pose a threat, especially if Trevor Lawrence is slinging the football on the field early and often. So that's why this game going to be very pivotal when it comes to trying to make fantasy decisions, because a lot will hinge on the big play threats both of these teams pose to each other and how these defenses really can account for these weapons. So that's why I'm really intrigued by all these players in the situation, not just the offense, but the defense as well. And then the last one that I want to discuss as well is, in fact, another divisional game, perhaps the best divisional game of the weekend, Lions and Packers. Now, this Lions-Packers game is really going to come down to, yes, whether or not Jordan Love even plays, but also if the Packers are desperate enough to go toe-to-toe with the Lions or want to try to approach them in their own manner. Because I feel like the Packers are one of the teams that can go toe-to-toe with the Lions and turn this game into an old-fashioned shootout. But I just feel like the Lions right now just are proven to be one of the most versatile teams in the league. And I don't see how, if you're the Packers, you feel like you can beat this team outright rather than, try and chip away at them. Because you know that your backs are against the wall. So you know that you're not the favorites. But if you feel like your game plan is good enough for either of these quarterbacks to operate, then, by any means necessary, they can win this game. But this feels so odd because the Lions have so many weapons at every single phase of the game. And the Packers are seemingly trying to figure out, okay, how healthy can Jordan Love be? Will he need to be healthy enough to play in this game? Or do we think we can win this game with Malik Willis? And I would be much more confident in the former camp than the latter in making my fantasy decisions, because this can be a rough fantasy day for Packers players. But let me know what you think in the comments. Coming up next, we talk about the college football games with huge implications. A lot of SEC games and one big Big Ten game as well. We'll be right back after this short break.